Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Darkinjung peoples whose lands I'm on today. I also extend my respects to elders past, present and emerging from the various lands we're all tuning in from today, in meaningful solidarity with First Nations people and decolonial resistance around the world. If this is your first time tuning into a Digital Sala event, welcome. The Digital Sala is a virtual Filipinx collaboration that creates platforms where Filipinx writers from all over the diaspora can connect and collaborate, not only with each other, but also with new communities around the world. So whether you're Filipino or not, everyone is welcome to our Sala, a gathering place where we can share stories and sustenance. So my name is Carielyn. I'm a video poet and multimedia artist, and today I'll be your host as we chat about community building across literary diasporas and what that means for us now in this moment in time with everything that's going on in the world. So what role does literature and art play in community building? What can these communities offer each other in terms of mutual aid and care? And how can the impacts of these communities be felt beyond literary spaces? So to help us explore these ideas today, we're blessed to have 4 powerhouse literary voices from the Filipinx diaspora who are currently engaging in various forms of community building work in their own creative practice. So we have Gwen Bautista. Gwen is an artist, art journalist, and an independent curator from Manila, Philippines. She is also the co-founder of Spoken Word Manila. Her works explore personal and local narratives connected to larger political scopes while observing subtle forms of oppression. Then we have Eme. Eme is an interdisciplinary Filipinx artist based in Naarm, Australia, on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land of the Kulin Nation. This queer, trans, non-binary artist works within a decolonial framework based on research and bayanihan, or communal solidarity. It is often expressed through community connectivity, representation, and action by transforming stories of subjugation into strength. They showcase the communal experience to celebrate the nuances of being, utilising art as a tool for expression and survival. Their works experiments with photography, print media, ceramics, sound, video, events, and installation. Next up, we have Rachelle Cruz from Hayward, California. She's the author of God's Will for Monsters, which won an American Book Award in 2018 and the 2016 Hilary Gravendick Regional Poetry Prize. She was appointed the 2018 to 2020 Inlandia Literary Laureate. She co-edited Cuento, Lost Things, an anthology of Philippine myths with Melissa Sipin. Her most recent book, Experiencing Comics, An Introduction to Reading, Discussing and Creating Comics, was published in fall 2018. She is a lecturer in the Creative Writing Department at the University of California, Riverside. An Emerging Voices Fellow, a Condiman Fellow, and a Bona writer, she lives and writes in Southern California. Finally, we also have Isabel Garcia-Gonzalez, is a writer and educator who has taught students of all ages from kindergarten through college and beyond. She has received numerous fellowships, residencies, and awards for her writing, including support from Hedgebrook, Vona/Voices, and the Breadloaf Writers Conference. She was a finalist for the Poets and Writers California Writers Exchange Award, the Pen Parentis Fellowship Award, and the Glimmer Train Very Short Fiction Award. Her work has appeared in publications including Cuento, Lost Things, an anthology of new Philippine myths, and Riksha, Asian American Arts in Action. She holds an MFA in Creative Writing from Mills College and is a core organizer of Banyan, Asian American Writers Collective. She lives in the Chicago area with her partner and 3 children. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We're lucky to have such a diversity of mediums and approaches between you all. To just kick off our discussion, could you each talk a bit about the context of your literary scenes and what motivated you to build these literary spaces.
Who did you want to start? Okay, I'll start since I'm talking. So I'm situated in the art literacy scene, which is of course in the context of and about the legacy of art history and understanding human legacy, through the evolution of civilization, through Western perspectives, philosophies, ideologies, and representation. So it perpetuates the hegemonic narrative of its elite masters and founding fathers of the art canon. So that's what's taught to us in art school, and which obviously rings true to other social educational institutions. So I'm coming from a position that's called or seen as other, inferior, invisible, overlooked, savage, and specifically, obviously, in the Filipinx perspective. I was born in the Philippines, and I went here when I was 8, to with my family to start a better life. So you can imagine my position in the art world itself. It's resistant and reckoning in its very foundation. And also adding on top the layers of expressing all of me, like being, trans and non-binary and queer, and a person that goes through the world with chronic conditions. So it comes with its privileges and also its sorry, I totally lost I totally lost myself. So what desired me to, motivated me to do these works is the lack of critical spaces that really allows for people to just turn up and be themselves and express ideas that matter to us and for us. Yeah. And I wanted to connect and have a collective act of storytelling that's rooted in our oral traditions. Where the spaces that include our elders or our youth, or queer and gender non-conforming kin, or people with disability, our Muslim brothers and sisters. It doesn't exist, or I couldn't see it. So for me, it was it's critical.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's great that you've, your commitment to creating participatory spaces that are intergenerational, I think has been, it's been very heartening to be able to see. So thank you for sharing that, Emma. Rachel, would you like to share a bit about your experience with that?
Sure. Thank you, Carielyn and Eunice, for organizing this. And it's a total honor to be on this panel with Emma, Gwen, and Isabel. And I think it's amazing that we're zooming in from different parts of the world. And I find that community these days is that, right? Like connecting with one another through these digital platforms. And so I'm going to speak specifically about the digital Sala. I'm a part of a lot of different literary communities, but digital Sala is the one that's most recent and most dear to my heart. And it's been so nourishing to help build this community with other writers in the Filipinx diaspora. It came out of a sense of isolation, really, and wanting and yearning for a community during shelter in place. And Jason Magabo Perez, who I think started the conversation over Twitter, talked about a platform and a space where there are no gatekeepers, and that we can create and write and build with one another without barriers to access. And I think that motivated me to help build Digital Sala and be in conversation with other folks. And I think it also came from a space of not wanting to reproduce power structures and dynamics that have really kept a lot of folks out. And there have been spaces that I've participated in and I've benefited from my privilege. And then there are spaces where I know I've been kept out because of where I come from. And that was just not, I just didn't want to replicate that anymore. And so a lot of our conversations, and the Digital Sala is a total collective thing. There are no founders, really. And I love what Emma said about F the founding fathers, really, we're building towards something new. And it really came out of a need of wanting to just be with one another, and a space where we can create with each other, and there's no hierarchies, and where we strive to not reproduce those hierarchies. And so as a result, we've seen folks from Australia coming through, who never performed or read their work out in public. We've had younger folks, older folks, people from the Philippines. We've had people who are dabbling in science fiction and fantasy. So I find that with building this space, we didn't, at least I, in my participation with others, didn't want to create sort of the structures that we've already seen. So I've seen structures where literary fiction is seen this way, as this sort of model to strive for, and then science fiction and fantasy and comics are sort of the lesser genres, or spoken word is over here, and then poetry for the page is in the New Yorker. And it's just I'm tired of that. and that's not a reflection of how I engage with my art anyway. So it just was why participate in this, and why not build our own? And I think I'm grateful that there were other folks who are part of this. And the Digital Sala has there's no chairperson. It's if you're interested in building an event, people put on the event. And so I think that's a little bit of what motivated me to help build it.
Thank you for that, Rachel. I totally agree with you about the Digital Sala being such an incredible space. I remember when Eunice was telling me about the Digital Sala, I was really struck by her emphasis on decentralizing the sort of content that comes out of it. So yeah, thank you for that. Isabel, would you like to share a little bit about your process?
Sure. Thank you, Carielyn. Thank you, Eunice, for organizing this. It's wonderful to be here tonight with you, Emma, Rachel, and Gwen as well. What a great conversation to be having right now. I am going to be talking, focusing, I'm part of many different communities. The one I'm going to focus on the most is one that I've been involved in a lot more in the last few years, since moving to the Chicago area, called Banyan, Asian American Writers Collective. And it's just been such a wonderful thing to be a part of. It came from an idea that one of our collective members, MG Bertulfo, had, just post-Trump election, and really feeling the need to come together. Some of the themes that Rachel was talking about feeling isolated. I think that there was also, rising climate of xenophobia, and just the existing structures that were already there, the existing white supremacy and all these things that were already there becoming, post-Trump election, becoming more visible and more in your face. And so that was a lot of the impetus of creating this Asian American Writers Collective that is really focused on making visible the stories of Asian American writers, including people from the Filipinx diaspora, specifically in the Chicago area and the Midwest, where we're often seen as not as visible. In the United States, Asian American communities are so much focused, or attention is given to those on the coasts more often, on the West Coast and the East Coast. But there has been a long history of Asian Americans in the Midwest, for sure, and also literary groups in the Midwest. So, so Banyan is really, it's a collective. I really am feeling that too, what you talked about, Rachel, about like decentralization and everybody just really stepping up with what they have and what they have to offer, and supporting each other. So there are three main things that we do, and that a couple of them we've continued to do post pandemic, like in this time of pandemic when we can't gather. So one thing is that we do community events. We haven't had like a big, well, actually we have. It was part of the digital Sala. We had a community event called, that was co-sponsored by Banyan and the digital Sala in May, that was called Filipinx Voices from the Midwest. And it included many writers from Banyan, and it really reflected some of the things that we really hold dear in Banyan, which is to include everybody, include all different kinds of genres and people from all different backgrounds and experiences within the Asian American diaspora. So we had, somebody who, we had a couple musicians, we had a children's musician, we had somebody who writes humorous mysteries, we had literary fiction, we had all different kinds. We had historical fiction, middle grade novel. So that's something that's really important to us, is to just welcome everybody, no matter what you're writing, and not subscribing to like, this is the type of literature that everybody should be writing, and you're only welcome if you have this type of experience. So we do community events, we do monthly writing sessions, and again, everybody is welcome. And so we have all different kinds of people coming from, we're also very intergenerational, so lots of different ages coming through. And some people will draw during the time rather than write. Some people will be writing songs. So there's all different kinds of things that are happening within our creative space. And to me, that's really exciting. And then the third thing we do are these seasonal critique sessions, where people will submit work that they want to have their peers read and to get feedback on. So that's a little bit about Banyan and what we do, and sort of what I feel like makes it special, is that it's really just open to all, whoever wants to come. And during this time of pandemic, we've moved the monthly writing and community sessions to be online, and that's actually been able to open us up so much more, because it makes it more accessible. People don't have to be able to get to a geographical location or worry about childcare or whatever it is that might be a barrier to actually showing up to a physical space and time. So that's also been really great to see.
Thanks for that. That sounds like a really beautiful and vibrant, inclusive, diverse space. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about Banyan. And then we've just got Gwen, if you'd like to share some of your community space within the literary scene, that would be great.
Right. So first, I want to thank Eunice and Carielyn for organizing, and it's nice meeting Emma, Rachel, and Isabel, everyone today. I hope we get to collaborate in the future after this. So I'm co-founder of Spoken Word Manila, but I've also been part of many different literary communities in the Philippines, especially in the spoken word area. So, in 2015, together with my co-founder, Charms Tienzon, we decided to put up Spoken Word Manila, which is kind of like, we don't really want to call it collective, but it's more like like a bridge for all these other smaller spoken word communities, so that we can help them organize events and workshops and collaborate with them, and then also like share, social media content that they have, like videos of performances, and all these other things. So I was very, very surprised when we started, because when we started the Facebook page, because in the first week, I think we've had already like 1,000 followers. And now, 5 years after, we have about 16,000 followers on Facebook. And I think it's important to all be able to understand also the demographics of that. And many of them are actually students studying in the university, a lot of people in their early, I'd say early adult life. And that's also like the beginning of the spoken word art scene in the Philippines is also about that, about having all these safe spaces where people are just able to freely share their stories and share everything that they want to share with an audience, with a public. I've been doing spoken words since maybe about 2005 at least, and I can really see like the changes in terms of the number of audience that we're having, and how much they've been more aware with a lot of issues. But of course, many of them would start with stories about love and romance, but then you'd see them working towards having more materials about social political concerns, especially that's something that's very important with the political climate that we currently have. So we've had lectures and workshops, and Charms and I, we've always decided to ensure that apart from the platform being inclusive, so in many of the spoken word nights that we have, we also acknowledge other forms of spoken word apart from performance poetry, like stand-up comedy and other things. And it's like also what the others are saying, that it's just a place where you can come and you can share anything that you like. And sometimes it would take us after midnight, and it's just really fun to have that, and not to be able to have that limitation of what like understanding that this is a different form of art, and it's totally not bounded by any forms of canon or traditional take or whatever, like so that's the start, and that's why we decided to establish Spoken Word Manila.
Perfect. Thank you, Gwen. I was also interested in knowing whether what sort of challenges you faced, and this is a question for everybody in the group, but within the initial stages of building up your respective literary communities, what sorts of challenges you faced along the way. If you could share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Maybe I can start first. So like I've mentioned, like we've already been organizing a lot of these events since I guess 2008, 2009 at least. And in the early days of that time frame, the hardest part is, I guess, to find an actual space, like a bar, or just a legit space where people can actually use the sound system and all of these things. These are like logistics. These are these are like small but very important part of building this community, because people must know also the safe spaces where they can go to. And that's as one of the challenges that we've faced. And fortunately, I've met a lot of friends, or like I have a lot of friends who decided to put up their own spaces, cafes and bars, and they would allow us to hold and host our events there without asking us for any kind of fee, because usually you would pay to have like an event for with a bar, you know, because the you know, I think part of also what you want with spoken word Manila is this access, so that because we have a lot of young people in our audience who also, like me, when I was that age, I didn't have, you know, money to pay entrance fees, so we wanted to be able to have this access also for a lot of people, for everyone who would like to see a performance art or a spoken word event. But at the same time, the other challenging thing is also being able to provide, I guess, some sort of honorarium or like a talent fee or whatever to the artist as well. That's been a big issue because I don't, well, now I think that the conditions have changed, but in the, you know, it's still very hard to ask people, I guess, in a way to pay for some sort of entrance fee. And I've always been looking into and it's all, and not just with spoken word, but also with my work as an independent curator, to look into other modes of financial sustainability without commercializing, or I guess over commercializing things. So that's one of the challenges that we've had, which I think with the digital space now and with all this situation, that can easily be bridged with, you know, like Zoom and live streaming, but it's still a very different experience to be able to be there physically and hear the voices of the people and look into their eyes, and, you know, that's just different experience altogether.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those insights and letting us know how you overcame some of those challenges. Like, I love that you were saying that a lot of your own, essentially, your own networks of community sort of helped pull through and helped provide you access so that you could, provide access for others as well. So I think that's really, just a really beautiful way of exemplifying, like, you know, that pull of community. So thank you for that, Gwen. Isabel, would you like to share some of the challenges that you might have faced at the beginning?
Sure. I think that a challenge is really just that our collective is 100% volunteer, you know, so we all have full lives and we want to be doing everything that we're doing and maybe more, but just the constraints of, you know, whether there is enough time and resources to do it is one of the challenges. And so I think that one way that we've really been able to get through that is to just move at the pace that we can move at. I don't think I think it's easy to get caught up in this idea of we need to do more, we need to reach more, we need to have X number of events, we need to reach X number of people in this kind of more capitalist idea of like more volume, more. But I think what has been really helpful is to just look at, you know, what can we do, and what's realistic for us in this time with what we have. One thing that guides me personally in my work of community building and organizing is this idea that I read in Emergent Strategies by Adrienne Marie Brown. This idea of community building and organizing as being more about inch wide and mile deep rather than mile wide and inch deep. And so this idea of like the depth of your connections in your community are more important than the quantity and the broadness of your reach. And that's something that I've really felt in this, is that, yeah, it's great to reach more people, and it's also really important to just build build in a sustainable way, meaningful relationships. So that's been helpful too, is just like scale and what's manageable to help us manage what could become unsustainable. So it's really a collective effort, and I feel like I really need to just like speak the names of the people who are part of the collective. So MG Bertolfo really conceived of this and has spearheaded a lot of the efforts. And then Jane Shu and I started doing the monthly writing in community sessions. And now one of the wonderful things that like kind of meets the challenges is that we asked for help in the collective. And so now Ed Eusebio is stepping up and doing some of those along with Tina Baga and MG Bertulfo, so that like more people are taking this on. And then we had Karen Sue, who was like single-handedly running the seasonal critique sessions, and now Victor Yip has stepped up to help out as well. We had a presentation that along with Jane, Karen, MG, and I, Samina Hadi Tabassum also stepped up to do, and we've always had like steady support from Mia Manan and Sala. So I just, and many others, but I just feel like, to me, I feel compelled, like I'm not here just as an individual to talk about our work, because it really just feels like collective work. And that's really what has helped us to overcome what can be a challenge of trying to do this as unpaid labor on the side. You know, it really is like a working together and a love of community and supporting one another that helps us.
It really affirms the by community for community ethos. So yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you for sharing that as well. Rachel, I might pass the mic on to you if you'd like.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the digital Sala came out of a huge challenge, right? Out of the pandemic. It came out of, to me, it seemed like a collective frustration with the literary community, you know, in the United States, at least, in my experience. So there were a lot of challenges that sort of propelled us to start organizing. And so when we talked, we were like, we had these huge dreams. We really gave ourselves the, you know, the freedom and the space to dream really big about what we wanted the space to be. And so we talked about, you know, folks have talked about decentralizing the digital Sala, and we had a lot of principles, and we talked a lot, like, what are our guiding principles as this, we're not even like a group, we're just this thing, you know, like what's guiding us, and then how can we how can we create a community or involve folks with those principles, but leave it open for folks to take it on as they wish. And so I think the challenge was initially really following through with our principles. You know, I mentioned Jason's name earlier, and what's cool about Jason is that people confuse him as like, he's the founder of the digital Sala, and he's always like, I am not the founder. You know, this is a collective effort. And I think it's important to have that, you know, and to practice what we say we are. And I think a challenge now is, you know, including building the relationships. And I love what Isabel said about, you know, instead of, you know, the mile wide and inch deep, but the mile deep and inch wide relationships, right? Because this is all about community building and building relationships with folks that are authentic and centered around art and justice and access. And so I think in the beginning, it was a lot of us kind of for me, it was a lot of organizing events that I wanted to see. And I wanted to put the spotlight on folks that I felt like their work was marginalized in some way. And so a lot of us in the beginning were like pedal to the metal, organizing all these events. And then we were like, all right, it's the end of April, mid-May, let's see where folks want to take this. Because I think I was starting to get burnt out a little bit. And so I think a challenge personally, and I have this personal thing of like, I want to control. And I know that comes from a capitalist sense of like scarcity, right? Like me trying to control a thing. And the digital Sala is this total like project and like letting go and seeing this community unfold. And I never would have imagined, like, we have a strong like Midwest Australian contingent. Like people from Australia and the Midwest, like we have such strong representation in those regions. And I think I never could have imagined that. And so for me, it's like letting go and seeing where this work can go. And it's less about the individual and more about the collective and in terms of this project. And but you know, I was talking to a couple folks too. You know, we have some folks who are there in the beginning who are male identified, they're cis, and you know, I'm you know, a cis woman of color, and so there's like, I have like a little bit of that struggle too, where it's like, I want to be like anonymous, even though I'm talking about the digital Sala tonight. But there's also like we don't want the work of women of color to be buried either, right? Like the labor of women of color, you know, that shouldn't be in the margin. So I'm kind of like, you know, in kind of balancing that as I articulate my involvement with the digital Sala. And, you know, we're still fairly new, you know, we just started in late March. And so who knows what's going to happen, you know, but I think we just had an event earlier today and people were like excited to do karaoke party at some point when we get to see each other. Yeah, karaoke, and like people want to hug each other. So I totally hear what Gwen is saying about like the physical, you know, being in community with each other. And I know that'll happen someday.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, it's very exciting. The future is very, very exciting for digital Sala, methinks. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm also just low-key very keen to do a karaoke party anytime. And how about you, Emma? Would you like to share any of your initial challenges with your community building work?
Yeah, so I've been building communities even before like Usapan Sa La Mesa, but this one really kind of propelled me to be more in the organizing activist space. But so initially, I was doing my honors on decolonization specific to Filipinx experience and perspective. So introducing, like initially I was like, am I crazy? Is this possible? Am I going to be able to afford this? Because I'm coming, it's literally just me and family. And will I have my family's support, like my immediate family? Initially, the elders weren't supposed to, like my mom and my titas, they pretty much became, they self-appointed themselves as the chefs of Usapan Sa La Mesa, because it was supposed to be more of a potluck, like obviously bring dishes that came from, like, you know, how the differences of how we cook one dish, for example, and sort of like express all that. And yeah, I guess I just consulted a lot of my peers, my family, of course, telling them that this is going to be really, really labor intensive and emotionally draining and all that. It was very rewarding and nourishing as well. Also, of course, that comes just seeing as being disrespectful to others. You know, what will my barangay say? What will my titas that are no longer here say? And it's also obviously the reality of heavily colonized Christian values that we sort of attach within our identities as well. So yeah, consulting, everyone was of course that's what eased my anxieties. Also, it was extremely isolating and anxiety inducing to to focus directly on decolonization and being surrounded by mostly white folks, at school, staff and students. And of course, there was the reactions to the work that I'm doing was like, hostile and a bit like they felt like sort of attacked, and they, like, one person was like, oh, it happened so long ago, that whole usual usual stuff. And like a lecturer was like, how are you going to determine success with like participatory work and collective work? And it's funny because obviously our very definitions of success is very different. And yeah, so I think it's just it motivated me more to do the work, and seeing how it's necessary for our communities. Yeah, and also sourcing books and resources here is not easy. Like I tried to get Grace Nona's books. I think it was like The Song of the Babaylan, Living Voices, Medicine, Spiritualities of Philippine Ritualists, Oralist Healers. Yeah, I only had like 2 hours when I requested it at Sydney Uni. And also maintaining like a healthy sort of balance, like writing papers, throwing events, hand building ceramics, work, interviews, and all that stuff. So it's hard, but also, of course, what Rachel was saying about like letting go, and everyone as well, about letting go of certain things, like control. And as an artist, obviously you think about everything and you want everything right, or whatever. So those were some of the challenges that I went through initially with Usapan Sa La Mesa.
So thank you guys for sharing all of the some of the challenges that you guys faced. I think it's very obvious that the need to build these communities arises from the fact that there are a lot of challenges within the colonial capitalist framework for everyone, but obviously within the art and literary space for people who are writing to essentially like reclaim our bodies in a framework that very much will do everything it can to prevent that from happening. So that being said, what are some of the conversations that you have been having about safe spaces within your own communities? And this is again a question that's for all of you to answer. So whoever wants to go first.
I guess I might have more thoughts about this later, but initial thoughts, let's see, we're thinking about safe spaces for our community. I feel like, right when the pandemic hit, I'm thinking like more just recently, right around when everything was just unfolding, and even before that, with the rise of anti-Asian racism happening more, not that it wasn't always there, but just being more visible, and all that happening, I think that it was really important for us to continue to have our monthly writing spaces where we provide a lot of support for each other, and sometimes things come out in the writing that people are thinking about, or just in general, just to the feelings that people were having being in a pandemic and being in a time of uprisings around police violence against Black people. And so all of that comes, I think, to the space that we try to make for people. And some of it is not related to that, but I think that I think that a big part of why the space functions is that people feel like it's a place where I can go, where I can express myself. I can choose to share if I want to. I can choose not to share if I don't want to. And people will listen to me. And in a lot of instances, people will empathize with me because they have similar life experiences based on their identity. So to me, that's been something that has been important about the monthly writing spaces that we've kept going. And you know, when we have community events, it's been a wonderful place to just for people to come together, especially when I see like the intergenerational part of the community even broader, with like children and elders and everybody in between coming and coming to support voices that aren't typically showcased and in a way that is not only safe, like at a basic level, but also just like celebratory. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts on that question.
Thanks, Isabel. Rachel, would you like to share some of the conversations you're having around safe spaces?
Sure. I think right before this event, we were talking about how our earlier event with the digital Sala was Zoom bombed. So, I mean, that's like an ongoing thing. I think our first event back in March with Dean Alfar and Nikki Alfar, who are both amazing speculative writers based in the Philippines, was Zoom bombed. So I think that's an ongoing thing. I feel like because we were able to talk about our principles and what we were excited about, I feel like we haven't had many issues with folks like coming in to disrupt the space. And I think really we've been open to like where the space can go. And so, yeah, I think generally speaking, and maybe more will come to me later as I chew on this question more, but it's really been about like protecting the space with the participants who are already interested in being there from Zoom bombers. And so, you know, so a lot of that is like navigating technology and you know, and I think Gwen brought up the funding aspect too. And I think that's like an ongoing challenge and like how to create spaces that are safe for folks, but also, you know, how can we pay them, you know, for their time, and how can we support what they're doing? Especially if we're saying, you know, we support like marginalized folks, but how are we got to pay them, you know? And so I think that's part of creating a safe space for people who are participating, but also presenting their work as well. I think a safe space, for me, acknowledges like the labor that goes into these events, and again, that's ongoing, and it's also figuring out how to get funding, but also not being tied up with like institutions that may dictate what we're doing. And so I think that's you know, that's a conversation and a dynamic that we've been thinking about and talking about, and you know, all of the work with the digital salas in flux too. That was one of our principles, is that everything is flexible. And in the beginning, a lot of people asked us questions and we're like, we don't know. This might fail. This might just be a one and done experiment. But in terms of the folks who've been coming, I feel like there has been a sense of like wanting to protect each other and like protect the work. And there has been confidentiality with like what's been presented, you know, in sessions that haven't been recorded. So I think that's it. And I'm sure more will come, you know, more will come as we continue to evolve and roll out more events.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Gwen, would you like to share anything about some of the considerations that you're making about how to keep your community spaces safe?
So, so actually, we're facing a lot of issues here in the Philippines right now, especially with the political climate that we have, like I've mentioned. But also, our economy is also having a lot of problems right now, or like, well, it's always been like in a capital sense, but I guess like there was just a study that about 48% of Filipinos became unemployed since the pandemic, because you know, many parts of the Philippines have been in lockdown since March. So there are really not a lot of mobilization, and at the same time, there's a huge militarized response as opposed to medical response to the pandemic by the current administration. And because of all these issues, we're facing a lot of dangers into losing a lot of these actual safe spaces to begin with. Bars and cafes that have allowed us to stage our events and use their space as a sort of a platform and an agency, you know, for the events that we have, or any, you know, type of community building activities, have been starting to close down. And we've seen, you know, like we've seen a lot of that happening in the past months. These spaces have been, you know, who've been able to sustain their operations for more than a decade or so, are suddenly closing down because of economic issues with the pandemic. And at the same time, when we talk about having safe space, the president recently signed this anti-terror law, which contains a very broad and vague definition of what terrorism should look like, or at least be like. And it's going to endanger a lot of, I would say that's going to endanger a lot of activists. And currently we're seeing a lot of killings of activists, especially in the Visayas region. And you know, it's more intense these days. And especially with the anti-terror law, like you can't just simply post anything on Facebook, and if people in authority can interpret that as a form of terrorism, then they are allowed to arrest you and hold you for I think about 14 days without any charges. And because currently you can't do that, you have to let someone go within 24 hours. But imagine this changes that we're experiencing, and you know, it's a whole 360-degree change from all of that. But I guess what I always say is that we have to at least do something. And I really like what Isabel said also, like, it doesn't matter if you have a wide reach, or like you have big events or anything. It's what's important is just to keep doing things and finding all these creative ways of navigating all these limitations and all of this issues. Of course, like safety is definitely a priority when I think about holding events again, because there had been some some situation before, even before COVID, years ago, and that some of the events are, there's like military presence also surrounding some of the events, and kind of like trying to, maybe, I don't know, I don't want to, like say if they're trying to, threaten the scene or whatever, but having that kind of presence, I guess, and looking at how the current government is at, that builds more of worries, I guess. So yeah, definitely we have to be very creative with with what we what we're gonna have. One organization that I work with, the Concerned Artists of the Philippines, we've been holding also silent protests. I think many of you might know already that one of the major broadcasting corporations have already been shut down, and a lot of things are happening really. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're trying to still rethink, but definitely we'll move forward, and we're looking at maybe intimate workshops and talks, and just to continue with the activities without I guess the idea is you don't, if you're scared, and if you are scared and threatened, that's definitely what they would want you to feel like. So you have to be cautious, very, very cautious, but also not, not, you shouldn't stop doing, because that's what they want you to do. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Gwen. I think, yeah, just highlighting the importance of, how crucial the kind of work that comes out of these communities really is, like, with everything that's happening around the world, but as well, in particular in the Philippines, to just shed some light on what's happening as well, and to allow people to, have a space to explore what that means for them. I think, yeah, just really highlighting the importance of these communities. Just to wrap it up on a high note as well, I was wondering if you could each share something exciting about your community at the moment, or something that's exciting you about your community at the moment. Gwen, if you'd like to start, please go ahead.
So, Spoken Word Manila has been part of the 100,000 Poets for Change initiative since the beginning, since I think 2013, or but we've been doing it every year, and it's just, looking back, I was looking at all of the other photos and documentation that we have. Looking back, so the 100,000 Poets for Change is a global initiative. So even pre-Zoom or pre-COVID, like, people would be doing all this live stream of them reading poems or doing spoken word in one day, and simultaneously, just performing online. And I think the first time we did that was it back in somewhere 2015, and I remember I just saw in the photos that I actually brought an actual laptop to the live streaming, because back then, like, phones weren't really good for that kind of thing. And so it's very interesting that there's now, like, changes also in terms of technology, which is something that's very important, because as we find all these creative ways to look and explore other forms and means for all these events to be accessible. So yeah, definitely, we're going to do that, and we're announcing that in our Facebook page. And what I really like about it is that we started that, I believe, in the Philippines, and at least in Manila, and then, like, other parts of the country have also started forming their own 100,000 for Change events. And like, some of them, they would message me and ask me, like, if it's okay to put up their own event, and I've been telling them, like, you don't actually have to ask permission from me, because this is an event where people are supposed to just pitch in, and that's part of what we've been always talking here. Like, gatekeeping is a big issue also in the arts community, and we, as people with platform, we have to be very cautious about that as well, and how we use it. There's definitely going to be a lot of biases, but we have to, like, at least ensure that we try our best. We can just really try our best, I guess. So yeah.
Isabel, I might pass that one on to you now. Anything exciting you about your community in particular?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting time in our world right now, where everything is coming apart, and showing gaps where they've always been, and some things needed to come apart, and now we have opportunities to build things in new ways that work for more of us, that are more inclusive. And so one of the things that I find really exciting about this time, I mean, there's so much that's not exciting and horrible about this time, but one of the things that's exciting is like spaces like this that were not as readily available, or we hadn't thought to reach out across time and space and to really make connections. I love that. I loved that about participating in the Digital Sala event in May. I was just part of this wonderful community that's part of the Filipinx diaspora that was put on by Balay Creative in south of Market in San Francisco, and facilitated by Dr. Jeannie Celestial. That was really it was called Wayfinding in a Time of Transformation, and looked at just this idea of wayfinding from a decolonial perspective, and where are we right now? What can we learn from the past, and think about the directions we want to go now in this specific time of pandemic and uprising. And we were able to do that because I didn't have to like figure out, there's no way I could go to San Francisco for this for 6 weeks. So we had times when we would be in a breakout room, like me in a suburb of Chicago, somebody in a car driving down to Santa Barbara, and somebody in New York. And we're all connected as part of this Filipinx diaspora. That's really exciting to me. And that's something that we're also seeing at Banyan, is just like who's able to show up to our events now that wouldn't be able to before, because of just, time, space, access. Some of those things are just kind of falling away now in a good way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think there's a lot of a silver lining in a way to kind of having to move everything to an online space. Yeah, I think it's great that there's been so much more access. Rachel, is there anything that's exciting you in particular about your community, or everything?
Yeah, I mean, we've started online, so I think we're going to continue doing some events online. We're hoping to do some events for Filipino American History Month in October. All of that is in flux. And so, but what's exciting to me is just seeing like these events continue, and, see people feeling moved and inspired to put on what they want to see in their communities. And I'm just grateful to be a part of it. So.
Thank you. And Emma?
So what's exciting me about the community at the moment is just that people are learning or relearning their native tongues, regular group sessions, catch-up sessions. They're creating their own initiatives to support, Lumad and indigenous people in their, fight for self-determination, ancestral lands, and just right to live. And also just like sending each other gifts, home-cooked meals, sending, plants and flowers with like really cute messages. And and learning self-defense techniques, and just building knowledge as well, living and thriving. That's what's exciting.
So beautiful. So we're just going to wrap up now with a final question from our audience member. In what ways are your communities dedicated to nurturing each other's joy in non-literary ways? I really just want to know how often you do karaoke events after literary events or any other kind of celebration. So whoever wants to take that one first, go ahead.
I can take that on. We just had an event earlier. I keep referencing this event earlier today, but that's what's most fresh on my mind. But right after, someone who's part of the community was like, hey, can we just like hop on like Google and just like hang out. So we just like talked for a while and like hung out and, you know, so that's just been giving me joy is that we are having these workshops and readings and sessions, but like people are also like meeting outside of these like structured sessions and events to like just get to know each other. And, you know, I've, there's a member of the Digital Sala who is also now a friend of mine, but we've been watching Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix. So that's been giving me joy. And he watched it before, but I would like send him updates of where I was at in the seasons. And like, there's just so much, you know, that's non-literary, but there are like all these different ways we get to be human with each other and like share enthusiasm for, I love what Emmy said about like food and plants and like all these different ways we get to nourish each other that I'm just seeing come out in these really natural ways. And I just hope that this space continues to be a humanizing space, a space where we get to just be our fullest selves. And, you know, I'm grateful, like, because I feel like I need to put on different masks and hats for like different professions and I need to be this way over here. And like, all right, if I'm teaching a class, I should wear like a shirt with sleeves on it, stupid things like that. Like, you know, so like, this is a space where I can be myself and I don't have to put on a persona. So, you know, hopefully that answered that question.
Absolutely. I think a lot of us can probably relate with a lot of that, including the, you know, avatar swapping sessions. Isabel, would you like to talk about, you know, nurturing joy within your community as well?
So a big part of our community in Banyan was always food, you know? So, you know, for the monthlies, everybody would bring food and we'd share. For the community events, we'd have, you know, everybody would bring more food. So that's something that has brought a lot of joy to us that now we can't partake in. So I think we have to think about that as like, what are other ways to share this type of food, the joy that we get through food? But I would say like just the consistency of the monthly generative writing workshops. It's always a joy to be there in that space and see sometimes familiar faces. And it's a really open door kind of space. So some people haven't been there for like 8 months and then they show up and everyone's like, oh, hey, great to see you. So I think that it's one of the joys is just being able to come together as you can, or when somebody shows up and they're new and they're like, oh, I'm kind of new, I'm nervous about being here. Everybody just kind of comes together. Now we type in the chat like, hey, welcome. So, and the chat has interestingly become like a really joyful place for me now too, in our Banyan writing sessions and just like in different online spaces that I've been in. It's been this really interesting, like sort of side conversation, but also a place to like make connection and express joy or ideas that you can't necessarily do in the big group. So yeah, I guess like chat on Zoom is one of the joys.
Thank you for that. I agree. I'm a bit of a serial chat box troll, so can relate. And you, Gwen, is there anything in particular, any particular ways that you are nurturing each other's joy in non-literary ways?
Well, so apart from like the literary scene, I'm also part of the visual arts scene here in the Philippines, and both scenes are actually, you know, founded on a lot of social gatherings. And since that's not allowed right now, we tried to go on Zoom to do an inuman. So it's like, do you guys know how to spell inuman? It's, you spell with an I, but we spell it with an E. And I think, like, of course, like it's really obvious where's that, you know, where's that from, but also we like the idea of having that inuman because there's a funeral home here in the Philippines where they started this e-burol, you know, like long time ago, like even before the pandemic. This was like years ago. This funeral homes, they started the e-burol, which is like an an electronic wake. So there's like a CCTV. It's really weird. Like there's a CCTV camera inside a funeral home where you can actually attend the wake. And I guess like that we found that really odd, but also like very efficient, I guess. So we wanted to call our sessions like Inuman. So we'd go on Zoom and then like we have our drinks and the first 2 months of the lockdown was very, very hard because there was a liquor ban. So all of the alcohol that we saved, last year from Christmas and New Year, and I think we've consumed all of that during the liquor ban. So, we'll like just drink and we'll just talk about a lot of things, and we'd play with the virtual backgrounds, like really crazy stuff. Like it can be the North Pole or whatever. It's just really funny. And so yeah, those are the things. Definitely I live in the Philippines, so we try to get away as much from karaoke. But if you invite me and if you guys are gonna host one, we'd definitely love to come, and I'll invite some of my friends who also live in other parts of the country. So those are the kind of things we try to do here. And of course the food. I miss having that, like people just sharing food, lots and lots of food.
Thank you all so much for everything that you've shared with us today. Emma, Gwen, Rachel, and Isabel, thank you guys so much for your heartfelt and illuminating insights and reflections. And thank you as well, everyone else, for joining in this vital conversation at a time where our ideas about community are being changed and tested and challenged. It's important to consider and constantly reconsider ways to connect with each other and form community. So I think that's going to be it for our discussion today. It will be up on the Digital Sala's social media channels after this, so please feel free to share it around with your own communities and friends as well. Also, don't forget to check out our wonderful panelists' works further. We'll have our links listed on the event as well to their works. And lastly, a huge thank you to Eunice Andrada, poet and organizer extraordinaire, for producing and facilitating this event. Thank you for your commitment to community building and community care. So it's been a pleasure sharing time and energy with you all today. Take care. Thank you. And keep for a karaoke session.
Amen. Me too.
Thank you.